we build skyscrapers, we split the atom. I think we generally assume our hands and our tools are what make us the pinnacle of evolution.
Right, the whole toolmaker identity, it's how we've always defined ourselves.
Exactly. But there is this really compelling scientific and spiritual argument that our ultimate defining trait isn't what we build with our hands, it's actually what our throats can project.
Which is such a wild paradigm shift when you really stop to think about it.
It really is. I mean, human speech is, when you break it down, it's basically a form of biological Wi-Fi. You hold this insanely complex thought or an abstract emotion or, I don't know, the blueprint for an entire civilization inside your brain. And just by pushing air out of your lungs and shaping it with your mouth, you wirelessly transmit that entire concept directly into my brain.
And that biological Wi-Fi has an astonishing bandwidth, yet we just walk around using it all day without a second thought. We treat talking like breathing.
Yeah, we totally take it for granted. Which is why, in this deep dive, we are exploring the profound connection between the hard science of human language and its spiritual significance in the Quran and Hadith.
Because the stack of sources we're looking at today, going from modern neurobiology and psychology journals straight to classical spiritual frameworks, it reveals that speech is simultaneously this staggering physical miracle and, well, our heaviest spiritual responsibility.
Oh, for sure.
We're going to look at how a fetus wires its brain for language in the absolute dark of the womb, how the genetics of our vocal cords dictate our reality, and even how the ancient rhythmic recitation of scripture is actively being used in clinics today to treat severe speech disorders.
It's going to be a fascinating ride. But to really grasp the spiritual weight of our words, I feel like we first have to look under the hood at the physical hardware that makes this transmission possible.
Right, you can't have the software without the hardware.
Exactly. And the Quran actually points directly to this hardware. Like in Surah 55, Ar-Rum, the text explicitly states that God created humanity and taught us al-Bayan.
Which translates to clear speech or the ability to express complex thought.
Right. But then Surah 90, Al-Balad, takes it a step further and highlights the highly specific anatomical gifts you need to actually pull this off. It asks the listener, have we not made for him 2 eyes and a tongue and 2 lips?
And that anatomical call-out, I have to say, is incredibly precise from a physiological standpoint, because we tend to think of language as just this purely brain-based phenomenon,
Yeah, the brain generates the words, so the brain gets all the glory.
Exactly. But the physical apparatus required to turn a thought into an acoustic wave is a mechanical marvel. Take the lips, for instance. They are rarely given credit for intelligence. Their basic biological function is just to preserve the moisture of the mouth, which keeps the vocal tract pliable. But fundamentally, they are the gates of phones, the distinct sounds that construct our words. Without the highly coordinated muscular contractions of the lips, human language as we know it, with its rapid-fire consonants like P, B, and M, it would be physically impossible.
Wow.
Yeah, without them, you would just be emitting this indistinct, continuous flow of vowels.
So our entire vocabulary is literally trapped in our throats without the physical gates of the lips.
That's wild. And here's where it gets really interesting, at least for me. The construction of that hardware starts astonishingly early. The science journals and our sources point out that babies actually begin learning language at 24 weeks.
Yeah, in the womb.
In the womb. They're literally submerged in fluid, and yet they're doing linguistic homework.
It is amazing because at 24 weeks, the auditory system reaches this level of development where the fetus isn't just, perceiving muffled ambient noise.
They're actually processing it. They are actively cataloging data, they are recognizing the specific pitch of their mother's voice, and absorbing the unique rhythm and melody of their native language.
That is mind-blowing.
It really is. And it's why a newborn baby, literally minutes after birth, will already show a measurable neurological preference for the language they were listening to in utero over a foreign language. They've been studying its cadence for months.
What really struck me in the sources is how perfectly that developmental timeline maps onto the Qur'anic description of human senses. Like, the Quran repeatedly mentions the senses of hearing and sight, but it consistently places hearing before sight. It's a very specific sequence.
And modern embryology perfectly mirrors that exact sequence. The auditory system is functional and actively shaping the neural pathways of the brain long before the visual system ever comes online.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the fetus is literally listening, processing, and learning the foundations of human communication in total darkness, weeks before their eyes ever open to process a single photon of light. Sound builds the brain first.
Sound builds the brain first. I love that. But wait, I need to pause here and play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go for it.
We are hyping up human speech a lot right now.
Yeah.
But don't animals communicate? Like, birds have these intricate songs. Whales transmit sounds across entire oceans. And bees do those complex geometric dances to show the hive where the nectar is.
The waggle dance? Yeah.
So are we just doing a slightly more complicated version of the bee dance? Is human language fundamentally that different?
It is a totally different paradigm. I mean, animal communication systems are astonishingly complex. There's no denying that.
Right.
But they operate on closed, finite loops.
What do you mean by finite loops?
So, like, a vervant monkey has a specific alarm call for a leopard, a completely different call for an eagle, and another one for a snake.
Okay.
But they cannot combine the leopard call and the eagle call to tell a story about what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow. Human language, which is driven by this incredibly complex genetic architecture, including the FOXP2 gene, is infinitely generative.
Meaning, we basically have no upper limit. We can just keep generating new concepts out of thin air.
Exactly. That FOXP2 gene helps govern the fine motor control of the lips and tongue we were just talking about, which allows us to execute rapid, complex facial movements. And because of that physical dexterity, our brains can take a finite set of sounds, just a few dozen phonemes, and combine them into an infinite number of sentences.
Right, because new words are invented daily. We can discuss theoretical physics, invisible emotional states, or, dragons.
Exactly. Our biological hardware produces uniquely limitless software.
But, there's a dark side to this. If our vocal hardware is biologically limitless, that means we have no built-in guardrails for that software.
Right.
We have the capacity to generate infinite sentences, which means we have the capacity to cause infinite psychological damage if we aren't careful.
Right. A limitless tool is a dangerous weapon in the wrong hands.
Precisely. And that is the exact pivot from biological capacity to spiritual consequence in these texts. When your output is infinite, your accountability must be absolute.
And the classical Islamic texts are hyper-aware of this danger.
Oh, absolutely. There is this really striking hadith that captures the terrifying velocity of casual speech. It states, "The servant may utter a word without thinking about it, and fall because of it farther than the distance between the east and west."
That is a heavy image.
It is, and it ties into that famous foundational advice to simply speak good or remain silent. But what I found really fascinating was a traditional commentary regarding the anatomy we just talked about.
Oh.
It suggests that if your tongue is this wild muscle driving you to commit a sin, your lips were given to you as a physical cage.
Oh, I like that.
Right. You have the mechanical tool to simply close the gates and contain the damage before it escapes.
It's a really powerful metaphor for self-restraint. But what's cool is that it's also deeply rooted in neurobiology, because the impact of our spoken words doesn't just damage other people, it physically alters our own internal state.
Wait, our own words physically alter us?
Yes. Our sources included this clinical study from a psychology journal that examined university students suffering from high baseline levels of depression, anxiety, and stress.
And let's be real, university students are essentially walking stress receptors.
Oh, without a doubt. So the researchers wanted to test the physiological impact of positive spoken words. Specifically, they had the students engage in religious affirmations and supplications, which are known in the Islamic tradition as dua, using a strict pre-test and post-test design.
Okay.
And the results weren't just anecdotal, they were statistically significant. Engaging in the physical, vocalized act of these affirmations actively lowered their stress and anxiety scores. But even more remarkably, it measurably improved their problem-solving skills.
Wait, so just to be completely clear on the mechanics here, they didn't just think positive thoughts. The physical act of vocalizing these specific words changed their brain chemistry enough to make their prefrontal cortex better at solving logical problems.
Yes, because speech is a neurofeedback loop. When you vocalize a concept, your brain generates the thought. Your motor cortex moves the muscles to speak it. Your ears hear it out loud, and your auditory cortex processes it back into the brain as incoming data. You are essentially surrounding your nervous system with the concept.
You're bathing your brain in it.
Exactly. Vocalizing positive, grounding affirmations physically lowers cortisol, the stress hormone, which is then frees up the cognitive bandwidth you need for complex problem solving. Words don't just evaporate into the air, they rewire the speaker.
That is incredible. And I think that makes the specific way we choose to communicate incredibly vital. Because, you can't just yell at someone to calm down and expect it to actually work.
Right, that never works.
To use an analogy, you don't use a sledgehammer when you need a scalpel. Different situations require drastically different linguistic tools. And the Quran actually outlines 3 distinct styles of communication for different scenarios, which the sources break down.
Yes, this is a fascinating section.
First, there's Qalan Baliga. This is effective, penetrating, eloquent speech.
Right, it's referenced in Surah An-Nisa. The literal Arabic root implies speech that reaches its destination.
Okay, so it lands where it's supposed to.
Exactly. It is transparent, highly targeted language, designed to pierce through confusion and awaken a person's moral consciousness, but doing so without triggering their defensive walls.
Right. And then you have the second tool, which is Qalan Layina, meaning gentle speech. And the context for this one is wild.
It really is.
This was the specific command given to the prophets Moses and Aaron when they were sent to confront Pharaoh, the ultimate absolute tyrant of the ancient world. And God explicitly tells them, speak to him mildly, use gentle speech.
Which completely defies our natural instincts. I mean, when we confront tyranny or massive ego, our instinct is to match it with aggression and volume.
We want to fight fire with fire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Qalan Layina is a masterclass in psychological de-escalation. Think about it, if Moses walked in shouting, Pharaoh's amygdala, which is the threat detection center of the brain, would immediately hijack his nervous system.
He'd go straight into fight or flight mode.
Exactly, completely shutting down the logical parts of his brain. But gentle speech bypasses the amygdala entirely. It lowers the listener's heart rate and keeps their prefrontal cortex engaged, creating an environment where persuasion is actually biologically possible.
It's essentially hacking the listener's nervous system with softness.
Yes, exactly.
That's brilliant. And the third style is Qalan Karima, noble, dignified, deeply respectful speech. This one is commanded in Surah Al-Isra, specifically when speaking to your aging parents.
Right.
The verse famously says that even if they test your patience, you shouldn't even say to them. You must use noble words.
Which, I mean, think about how hard it is to explain a smartphone to an older parent for the 5th time without sighing or rolling your eyes.
Oh, it's nearly impossible.
Right. The text is demanding absolute mechanical control over your vocal cords in high-stress, deeply personal moments.
Because suppressing that sigh requires massive executive function. And what is so fascinating is that these 3 frameworks aren't just rules for personal piety. They are highly functional in the modern world. Yeah, you found that business journal, right?
Yes, one of our sources is a contemporary business journal that actually mapped these exact 3 Quranic principles onto the modern practice of corporate marketing and personal selling.
So you literally have modern corporate salespeople using 7th century scripture to close deals.
And doing it ethically, which is the key distinction here. Because conventional sales often rely on high-pressure transactional manipulation, which just spikes the buyer's anxiety.
Yeah, nobody likes feeling cornered.
Right. But the study demonstrated that integrating these Quranic principles completely transforms the client relationship. Using Qalan Baliga ensures the core marketing message is perfectly clear and logically sound. Using Qalan Layina means handling customer objections with genuine empathy and softness, rather than defensive pushiness.
Bypassing the buyer's amygdala.
Exactly. And Qalan Karima ensures the foundation of the relationship is mutual human dignity, rather than just treating the client like a walking wallet. The ultimate blueprint for ethical long-term business trust was essentially documented over a millennium ago.
It is all about having the situational awareness to deploy the right style at the right moment, which I think naturally leads us to look at how the Prophet Muhammad himself utilized these tools.
He's a master of it.
Yeah, he was historically known for Jawami al-Kalim, which means concise eloquence. He had this ability to convey massive, layered concepts in just a few simple words. But the historical sources highlight a completely counterintuitive tactic he used. Despite being the master of clarity, he would occasionally drop bizarre, entirely unfamiliar, or even invented words into his speech. The Arabic term for this is garaba, or new vocabulary.
And honestly, it seems entirely paradoxical for a master communicator. I mean, if your ultimate goal is to ensure your message is universally understood, why would you deliberately inject a word that you know nobody in your audience has ever heard before?
Exactly. But it makes total sense when you think about, like, your smartphone's predictive text.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Our brains are constantly guessing the next word in a sentence to save mental energy. If I say to you, I'm going to walk the sentence, your brain automatically fills in dog before you even finish the sentence. You've stopped actively listening.
Right, you're on autopilot. And that is the exact neurological trap he was avoiding. Our brains operate on predictive coding. When the Prophet was discussing something of monumental importance, he couldn't afford for his companions to be on linguistic autopilot.
So he broke the model.
He intentionally broke the predictive model. For example, he once used this really obscure word, al-harju, and the companions instantly stopped. The pattern was broken.
The brain registers an anomaly.
Yes, which forces a spike in dopamine and demands active attention to resolve the error. They had to physically lean in and ask, "What is al-harju, O Messenger of God?"
He forced them to ask the question. He turned a passive lecture into an active dialogue.
By the time he answered, explaining that al-harju meant widespread killing or murder, their brains were in a state of hyperfocus. The definition locked into their long-term memory because their curiosity had been artificially spiked. It was a brilliant, deliberate psychological strategy for deep education.
And his linguistic agility didn't just stop at inventing words either. He was an absolute master of code switching.
Oh, definitely.
When different Bedouin tribes traveled to visit him, he would seamlessly shift his dialect, his accent, and his vocabulary to match theirs. He spoke to them in their own specific version of Arabic,
which requires an immense level of cognitive flexibility. He was harmonizing the core message while shifting the delivery vehicle so that the listener felt a deep sense of tribal familiarity and psychological safety.
And this diversity of dialects, the fact that human beings fracture into thousands of different languages and accents, it isn't treated as a barrier in the Quran. It's actually framed as a profound cosmic feature. Like Surah 30, verse 22, explicitly points out that the creation of the heavens and the earth and the variations in your languages and your colors are divine signs for people of knowledge.
Because without that variation, human society would literally collapse.
Wait, collapse? How so?
Well, if every human on Earth looked absolutely identical and spoke with the exact same phonetic signature, mutual recognition would be impossible. The vast diversity of human tongues is the biological mechanism that allows individual identity and complex social structures to even exist.
Okay, so speech connects us across tribes, it teaches us, it alters our brain chemistry and lowers our cortisol. But I want to push into something even more radical from the sources.
Let's do it.
Can the actual physical mechanics of how we speak heal a broken biological system? I'm talking about the clinical application of Qur'anic recitation in treating psycholinguistic disorders. Specifically stuttering, which our sources dive heavily into.
This is such a fascinating area of research.
Now I have to stop and ask, is this just a placebo effect? Like, I am reading a sacred text, so I feel spiritually calm and therefore my stutter momentarily goes away? Or is there a hard, measurable physical mechanism at play here?
Oh, it is an intensely mechanical and physiological process. It is definitely not just about feeling peaceful. To understand why this therapy works, you have to understand the mechanics of stuttering itself.
Okay, break it down for us.
Stuttering frequently stems from a profound lack of coordination between the respiratory system and the vocal tract, and it is heavily compounded by psychological pressure. Think of spontaneous, everyday speech like driving a car off-road in the dark.
Okay, sounds stressful.
Very. You don't know where the bumps are, you are constantly making micro decisions about what word to use next. And for someone who stutters, the anxiety center of the brain, the amygdala, is constantly misfiring, which literally causes the vocal muscles to seize up.
So spontaneous speech is just a high-stress, unpredictable environment for them. But reading the Quran isn't spontaneous.
Exactly the opposite. Quranic recitation is governed by these unyielding mathematical laws of pronunciation known as tajweed. You cannot improvise.
Right, there are strict rules.
Very strict. You are told exactly where to pause, exactly how many seconds to stretch a vowel, and exactly where the tongue must strike the teeth. It provides a paved, brightly lit neurological highway. And one specific technique used in this therapy is called hadra, combined with nabra.
Hadra being a highly rapid, continuous style of recitation, right?
Yes, a rapid pace that relies entirely on stored memory. When a person who stutters uses the Hadra method, they are bypassing the cognitive load of having to choose words. And then Nabra is the physical, conscious stress placed on specific syllables. It demands intense, deliberate muscular effort.
So they're basically forcing their vocal tract to follow a strict external rhythm.
Yes. And by forcing the body to strictly regulate breath and muscular effort to hit these precise intonations perfectly, a massive psychological shift occurs. Because the person is successfully executing a highly complex, rapid, rhythmic pattern without seizing up, they are proving to their own brain that their biological hardware actually works. Their self-confidence skyrockets, which overrides the anxiety loop that triggers the stutter in the first place. Over time, mastering this strict acoustic rhythm builds a physical fluency that begins to translate back into their everyday off-road spontaneous speech. They are using ancient rhythm to rebuild modern neurological pathways.
That is just wow.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back and look at this staggering journey we've just charted. I mean, we started in the darkness of the womb with a 24-week-old fetus learning the acoustic melodies of language before their eyes could even process light.
Right.
We unpacked how our lips and the FOXP2 gene give us an infinite capacity for creation, while our lips literally serve as a physical cage to prevent infinite harm. We explored how vocalizing positive words physically alters our stress chemistry, how gentle speech bypasses the fight-or-flight response, and how a master communicator uses strange words to hack our brain's predictive coding.
We covered a lot of ground.
And finally, we've seen how the strict mathematical rhythm of ancient scripture can physically rewire a stuttering vocal cord. So what does this all mean?
It forces us to view language not merely as a tool for trading information, but as the very fabric of human reality. And with that infinite power comes absolute accountability. The sources remind us of a terrifyingly clear verse from Surikov. Not a single word does a person utter except that there is with him an observer ready to record it.
Every single syllable.
Every syllable is documented because words build empires, they forge deep human trust. They literally heal the brain, but they can also tear all of that down in an instant. Speech is our greatest biological gift, but it is our heaviest spiritual trust.
And that leaves us with a final, really vital thought to ponder. We have learned today that speech is physically transformative. We've learned that the Quran was primarily an auditory revelation before it was ever transcribed onto parchment. It was specifically designed to be heard, felt in the chest, and recited aloud to literally wire the neural pathways of the human brain toward focus and peace.
Absolutely.
So given how profoundly the specific rhythms, cadences, and words we hear shape our neurochemistry and our mental health, I mean, you have to ask, how is the constant, chaotic, unmeasured background noise of modern media and algorithms physically reshaping our minds today? If the carefully measured, intentional speech of the ancients built emotional resilience, what is the endless digital noise doing to our biology?
It really is the defining question for our cognitive health in this century.
It's something to think very carefully about the next time you open your mouth to speak or put your headphones in to listen. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.